Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
In the 2024 Jeep Grand Cherokee L, the journey from point A to point B isn't such a rush. In fact, with 3 rows of spacious comfort, thoughtfully crafted luxurious design, and an available premium Macintosh audio system, you'll find yourself seeking out the scenic route more often, even if it's just another lap around the block. Jeep, there's only one. Visit Jeep.com to learn more. Jeep is a registered trademark of FCA US LLC.
Hear that? That's what a better way to money sounds like. It also sounds like that. And that. That's because Northwestern Mutual Financial Advisors get to know you better. They hear what's important to you and help you plan to make it happen. They see opportunities and gaps others might miss. They help make your best life even better. That's a better way to money. Let's get started at nm.com. The Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Uncertainty, instability, those seem to be the biggest words to describe the situation in Canadian politics right now. Hello, I'm Brian Lilly. Welcome to Full Comment Podcast. If you haven't heard, Jagmeet Singh ripped up his agreement. Let me say that again. Jagmeet Singh ripped up his agreement with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. We talked about that last week. But since then, the Conservatives have said they will bring in a non-confidence motion. They've released the wording of the motion. And opposition parties who are not the Conservatives have said, oh, we couldn't possibly vote for that. There's so much to go on, plus by-election results to dissect. Wanted to bring in a political roundtable. Stuart Thompson and Tasha Sheridan both write and work with National Post. They are also the pair behind the newsletter Political Hack. Tasha joins me from outside Toronto, Stuart from Ottawa. Thanks to both of you for coming on.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Brian.
I didn't get your official title in there, Stuart, because I don't pay attention to titles, but you can tell me what it is.
I'm the Ottawa Bureau Chief.
Ottawa Bureau Chief.
Yeah.
And Tasha, of course, columnist of long renown. It sounds weird to say Ottawa Bureau Chief.
Yeah, it's news. So yeah, it doesn't sound right. It sounds like somebody made a clerical error.
I had that title for News Talk 1010 and CJID years ago. It gets you into meetings. Take that title and run with it. You find out stuff that sometimes you can't publish ahead of time, but it is fantastic having that because you get the info before anybody else does because you may have to assign someone. So it doesn't look like you'll have to assign anyone to go and go to Rideau Hall and wait for an election call, because despite the Conservatives putting out a very, I thought, generic motion, one that the NDP and the Bloc should be able to vote for, it simply says the House has no confidence in the Prime Minister or the government. No mention of a carbon tax, nothing like that. The Bloc came out first and said, oh no, we won't support that. And of course, they want a pound of flesh or a few $1 billion in exchange for that. But bizarrely, the NDP came out and said, yeah, and we won't vote for it either, even though we ripped up our agreement and think this is the worst government ever. So what the heck is going on?
Well, yeah, we had about an hour of suspense because the Pierre Poilievre came out in the morning and said, we're going to do this motion. It'll happen on Tuesday. Here's the wording. And we had, I think, in the Post Bureau, the same thought that you had, which is that this is just a clean motion. So, it's got more chance of succeeding than another one. It didn't have the sort of poison pills that might make the NDP not vote for it. But Blanchette came out pretty quickly. The Bloc said, no, we're not going to do this. And I think they have not been big fans of Pierre Poilievre, the Bloc. That's been actually kind of a subplot on the Hill, is the Conservative Bloc back and forth. And I don't think that they want to be seen as the party that brings down the government with Pierre Poilievre. I think there's an optics thing going on here. There's also a lot of these parties aren't ready for an election. I don't think other than Pierre Poilievre, anybody truly wants one. But there is this game of, we don't want to look like we're propping up a really, really unpopular government, but we also don't want to look like we're bringing Pierre Poilievre to power. So this is kind of the high wire act that we're seeing right now.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when Jack Layton and the Bloc, Gilles Duceppe at the Bloc Québécois did not want to bring down Paul Martin's government, but eventually got to the point where they all said, yeah, this government's really unpopular and they have to go. Tasha, at some point, the other parties have to pull the plug, don't they? Or are we going until October 2025?
I doubt we'll go till October 2025. I do think that the budget offers the natural opportunity in the spring for them to pull the plug. I think this motion, honestly, I was actually thinking to myself, when you say we have no confidence in the prime minister or the government, actually, that's not great wording, because what if you have a bit of confidence? You have confidence, for example, the Bloc Québécois says they're going to pass that bill, that private members bill we have to improve OAS payments to seniors, raise them for people who are 65 to 75 to the same level as the 75, the one that you're talking about, billions of dollars. We have some confidence the prime minister will do that. We have a bit of confidence that maybe he'll do more stuff for Quebec. No confidence? Now we can't go that far. I thought it actually wasn't the smartest wording, but not semantics aside.
But no, the motion to pass, if you're going to topple a government, it actually has to say that you've lost confidence in the government.
Lost confidence is different than no confidence. You've lost confidence. You might have a little left, but anyway, not to break it down to semantics, but I think there was
words
no
are
chance.
Important.
There was zero chance they were going to support this for a couple of reasons. One, the Bloc just said before this motion was even introduced that it would not bring the government down. Blanchet said, we have a list of things that we want to get this government to do. The Bloc's agenda is to get the government to do those things. And once they're done, it can say, look, we pushed the government on this. And if they don't do them, they say, oh, it's Ottawa's fault. They're terrible. And then they'll bring them down after that's done. So they have something to run on in the next election. The NDP, Jagmeet Singh, already walked it back. After he had said that he ripped up the agreement, he was asked, well, will you bring the government down? He goes, well, no.
I was at his news conference here in Toronto where half a dozen of us tried to get him to say
I remember
whether
that.
he had confidence in the government or not. I asked him 6 times, once in one question, and then I kept interrupting him because he wouldn't say. Laura Stone from the Globe tried. David Aiken from Global tried. A reporter from Radio Canada tried. Everybody tried. He wouldn't say anything. The Bloc gets something out of this, and I'll let whichever one of you wants to jump in on this. The Bloc will clearly get something, and they're brazen. They're like, yeah, we want our demands met. I don't think that the NDP can get anything out of this. I don't think that they have any bargaining or negotiating power left.
You could see like the happiest people on the Hill were the Bloc. And I don't know if you guys saw them. They did their retreat at the Fairmont Montebello, which if you've ever been there, it's very nice. There's a certain brazenness about the Bloc that I just kind of love. They were, while everybody else was at Holiday Inns and trying to look like, they were being frugal, the Bloc was just super happy to be at this beautiful hotel. And
so for people that
they were supporting a Quebec hotel. They were supporting Quebec, Quebec Inc. So they were happy there. Yeah,
okay,
sure.
but if for people that don't know Chateau Montebello, it's across the river from Ottawa, about 45 minutes away. It is part of the Fairmont chain. It was originally built in the 1930s by an American industrialist as a private hunting club. And it looks like what you would expect a private hunting club for an American billionaire from the 1920s or 30s to look like. It's stunning. It's gorgeous. It's opulent. And yeah, you're right. The Liberals did a meeting, a Sudbury Holiday Inn recently?
Yes. We're not even sponsored by the Fairmont chain here, but we just do genuinely think it is that great. And that kind of sums up the Bloc right now, is they are just living their best lives. They know this is their moment. I mean, before, when the NDP and the Liberals were working together, the Bloc was kind of shut out. And the next big change will probably be a Conservative government. I think that's probably the betting odds right now. They're not going to get anything out of that. Maybe a Conservative minority.
Yeah, in a Conservative minority, they might. Stephen Harper gave the Bloc all kinds of things, but that's because he just promised to stay out of their jurisdiction, out of Quebec's jurisdiction.
On the Venn diagram of Conservatives and separatists, stay out of my business is the overlap, I think.
In a majority, they get nothing. And I think all polls point to a conservative majority. And I think that's the calculus, is that once the conservatives get in with a majority, it's 4 years of put up and shut up. No one's going to listen to you. So the NDP has never had it as good as it has now. The Bloc will never have it as good as it has now. So neither of them has any incentive to bring the government down. I think, to your point, though, at a point they will be forced to will be the budget, because that is what I would call a natural confidence vote. It is of its own nature. It's not forced. They don't want to give Pierre Poilievre the credit for forcing the government to fall. They will do it at a moment that just arises, unless there's some huge catastrophe that could happen. You never know, where the government makes some kind of a massive, egregious mistake. And then people would be saying, yes, absolutely, that's the last straw. But we haven't hit that straw yet. We're still waiting for that straw, Brian.
When we look at the polling in regional areas, and that matters far more than the national, and I'll start with our friends at Léger. Their most recent poll, 45% for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives nationally, 25% for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, 15% for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, 8% for the Bloc. Now, 8% for the Bloc in Quebec translates into a big lead. 34% of the vote. The Conservatives and the Liberals tied at 25%. How nervous are the Liberals about the Quebec, fall from grace, you might call it? I've never recall seeing the Conservatives at 25. I've seen them creep up to 20 and then fall back. And then, at the end of the election, they win their rump in and around Quebec City and maybe some up in the Saguenay. That's about it normally. Are the Liberals falling? Does this playing up to Quebec work for them? I'll ask you, Tasha. I know you've got strong ties to Quebec. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the Liberal caucus is very nervous right now. They're actually asking for a specific Liberal strategy for the Bloc. They have asked the party to say, we want a separate strategy for the Bloc. Forget the Conservatives in Quebec. The Bloc is the real foe. They're on the ascendancy. We've got to fight them. There's a lot of tension there. And you saw Pablo Rodriguez, minister, leave this week from his post at Transport to run for the Quebec Liberal Party. Okay, the Quebec Liberal Party right now is in third place in Quebec. It is nowhere near power. And yet, leaving the sinking ship, off he goes. That's a blow to Trudeau as well, because he's the Quebec lieutenant. So there's definitely a sense in the Quebec Liberal Party among MPs, this is a problem. There's a big problem. And the Bloc is that problem.
Stuart, maybe you can speak to this. I understand a bit of tension within the Quebec caucus of the Liberal Party, which isn't their biggest part. That'd be Ontario, but it's still core to the Liberal identity, how they do in Quebec. People like François-Philippe Champagne, Frankie Bubbles, not very bubbly or happy with Rodriguez. You're laughing, Tasha. Have you never heard him called Frankie Bubbles?
Oh, I love that. I laugh whenever I think I hear that name, because I think I've heard him say it about himself. He is very like a little bottle of champagne.
If you ask him, I gave him the nickname years ago, and he quite likes it. But Champagne is one of the people who's been complaining about a lack of a proper strategy under Pablo Rodriguez's management as Quebec lieutenant.
Yeah, and Rodriguez is responsible for the candidates they put up for these by-elections and most of the ridings in Quebec. So if you are looking at LaSalle, this is the by-election that they lost on Monday. They didn't have a high-profile candidate. It was a city councillor from the area.
Not even a city councillor, a borough councillor, which is like below that. Montreal's municipal politics is weird, but it's like you are the sub-councillor for your neighborhood is what Linda Palestini was. Yeah, and they lost that by a couple of hundred votes. And, if you talk to people on the ground, the strategist types, they'll tell you that probably about 5% of the race is local stuff. The rest is sort of national opinions, the national campaign in a general election. But I think in a by-election, you can say, if you lose by 250 votes and you had a subpar candidate, you probably could have won if you had a better candidate. And I think with all the resources and all the volunteers going into that riding, I think there's a lot of finger pointing going on. And part of this goes back to Toronto St. Paul's, where that was a catastrophic loss for the Ontario faction of the Liberal Party. But there was a certain amount of,
I don't want to say smugness. It's not quite the right word, but there was a certain amount of like, that's the Ontario guys. That doesn't happen in Montreal. That was the attitude all summer. And now they've had the exact same thing happen in their backyard to a Liberal leader whose riding is basically adjacent to that one.
To tie in the two by-election losses, I remember it was last November or December, and they had not yet declared when the by-election would be happening. We knew that Carolyn Bennett's leaving. Everyone knew in Toronto political circles that Leslie Church, Chrystia Freeland's former chief of staff, had moved back to Toronto and she was working hard for the nomination. I've worked with Miss Church when she was in the private sector at Google. I have no issue with her. Longtime Liberal soldier. But I was talking to a top Liberal and I said, are you guys going to go with Leslie Church in Toronto St. Paul's, or are you looking for a star candidate? And the guy at the other end of the phone laughed and said, you think we can get star candidates these days? And so like that's if you can't get a star candidate for a Toronto or a Montreal seat, you're not getting star candidates anywhere.
And those are safe seats. Those two seats
should be
safe Toronto, safe supposedly. And you're right, but they were candidates. There were local candidates who wanted to be the candidate, who were beating the bushes already in LaSalle, Verdun, and they were cast aside for the party's choice of Laura Palestini, and that didn't work. You also had 50 staffers say, we're not going to volunteer in the riding because we disagree with the party's position on Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza. You had the national campaign director quit. You had there was another MP from Quebec who said, my constituents want Trudeau to leave. So all this stuff happened during the by-election. People are not paying rapt attention to all this, but even one of those, you hear it, you think, wow, why should I vote Liberal again? They don't even think they can win. So they were shooting themselves in the foot the entire time on top of it.
Were you guys watching the Elections Canada update when the by-election results finally started coming in with the 91?
I went to sleep. I was waiting. I was, and then I was like, no, okay, I got to go to bed. So I didn't stay up till the bitter end.
I didn't stay up to the bitter end, but until about 1 o'clock I was watching, and it just kept rolling over. And it would be the Liberal in front. Then it would be the Blocist in front. Then it would be the NDP in front, Craig Sauvé. Two candidates with the name Sauvé, by the way. Love that. No voter confusion. Yeah, but it's the same as having two people named Johnson in Ontario, right? It's going to create some confusion. Was it the Rhinoceros Party found someone named Maxime Bernier to run against Maxime Bernier in his riding? Like, that creates voter confusion. But that was one of the tightest races I've seen.
Yeah, it was. It was very tight. But it was anticipated to be, well, not that tight. The Bloc was leading more in polls that were coming out for more significantly. But a lot of people thought it was going to be tight at the end. It was a get out the vote kind of situation as well. So, yeah, I mean, that just shows as well, like, if the Liberals had two rivals for this riding. Like, the Bloc eked it out, but two. And, Pablo Rodriguez has not said he's going to resign. He said he's going to keep his seat. But Honoré Mercier, his riding, could go NDP or could go Bloc as well. There have been both. It's been held by both other parties during its history. So who knows?
Stuart, how much do you think the Israel-Hamas conflict played in this? Because Craig Sauvé brazenly went out and put out campaign literature with the Palestinian flag. Now, I wrote about it. I denounced it. I'm now subject to a campaign complaining about me to the National Media Council, along with other journalists who wrote about it. How dare you say bad things about this man? He's a great look. I don't know the guy. I just think campaigning under the flag of a foreign country in an election for Canada's parliament is a bad idea. And by the way, the NDP defense on that, if you didn't see it, was I asked their senior comms person in Singh's office, is this real or did somebody Photoshop him with a Palestinian flag? And they sent me 4 photos, including 3 of Stephen Harper in foreign countries and one of Pierre Poilievre at a rally on the Hill with an Israeli flag, and said it's not unusual for politicians to be photographed with other foreign flags. One of them was Stephen Harper addressing the Australian Parliament in 2007. I'm sorry, that's not the same as he's going to campaign with the Palestinian flag. But I mean, if a candidate's willing to do that so much, I looked at the demographics. According to Stats Canada, it is about 5% Muslim, maybe a little bit higher if you add in Arab Christians. But they're not necessarily going to vote on that issue in the same way. I thought that was an odd thing, but it appears to have played a big role in the campaign. The NDP doing that, but as Tasha pointed out, the 50 staffers saying, we won't campaign for you. All right, you're fired. But how big an issue was this in the by-election?
Yeah, I think that both by-elections, actually, the Toronto St. Paul's one and this one, I think it really is a good microcosm of the difficult issue for the Liberals, because they're at 6s and 7s here, and they do have to govern. They have to do diplomacy, and they have to campaign domestically too. And also, being the sort of center-left party, it's hard for them. It's hard for them to really just choose a side. Pierre Poilievre has been able to just choose a side and stick with it. Makes things a lot easier. The by-election in Toronto, heavily Jewish riding, and you could actually say that was a big factor in them losing there. And then you go to LaSalle, where I think it's a small Muslim population, but I think they're younger student activist types is what the NDP was appealing to there. And the NDP was able just to go whole hog. And I mean, the campaign literature shows you they were going whole hog. They were going as hard as they could. There was no Canadian
flag on that. Their defense was,
yes.
Well, there's a maple leaf. Yeah, a maple leaf with the NDP logo at the top on the Palestinian flag. That's not the same thing.
Yeah. And I think there is what the part of the problem the Liberals are going to have here is that it just engenders a kind of apathy about them, where they're not seen as being on either side. So anyone who has strong feelings is not going to go to the Liberals. And then usually the people who don't feel strongly about the conflict will be voting on cost of living or something like that. So it's a tough issue for the Liberals, and I think it probably did play a role in that by-election.
Tasha, I got to ask you, as someone who's worked on campaigns, about the timing of this. In the Toronto St. Paul's by-election, and everyone please remember, the government determines the dates of these elections. Unlike the United States, the government in charge doesn't run the election. It's an independent group, but they get to choose the date and the timing. And in Toronto St. Paul's, the other factor beyond Israel was the capital gains changes. And they timed the election for the day before the capital gains changes took effect in a riding with a large small business population, a lot of small business owners in there. This one, I don't know who was smoking what, or how dumb they are. They scheduled the by-election for the first day back when you could lose. The Liberals were never going to win Winnipeg and Elmwood Transcona, and we'll get to that by-election soon. But they knew that they're up against tough odds in LaSalle and Verdun, and they could have chosen a different date. They could have chosen the week before. Instead, hey, you just lost on your first day back in Parliament. As someone who's been on campaigns, what was your reaction to that?
I thought it was weird too. I couldn't understand. I don't, you have 6 months, right? So you have 6 months to call by-election from the date of resignation. So you have time to play with. And yeah, picking that first day back, unless you think it's a slam dunk and you're going to win, right? Maybe that's what they thought. Oh, it's a ride. It's a safe seat. And we'll start with a bang. Sure, we're nowhere in Elmwood Transcona, and maybe the Tories will take that and they'll be all happy. But hey, we'll get this one. I don't know, Brian. Honestly, I think that the Liberals, one of their problems is that they are not. They're kind of lost. They don't seem to be focusing. Even the Prime Minister is saying things like, "Oh, we got to have reflection," and basically blaming Canadians, saying people got to understand what's at stake in these things. We have to make them understand. No, it's not. They're not the deplorables who don't understand. The whole thing Hillary Clinton did. It's the same kind of arrogant attitude. They just think they can do whatever. I think that's really it. It's like, oh well, yeah, we'll probably win. So let's do that on the first day of Parliament, if they even thought that far. But they take things for granted. Is my point. I think they're taking a lot for granted, and that is why they're in the position they're in today.
Just a quick note, Ontario is having a by-election on September 19th, and the Doug Ford's PC party picked that date specifically to try and kind of rain on the parade of Bonnie Crombie's Ontario Liberals because they start their provincial annual general meeting the next day. Ford could lose that by-election. So it's not just the Trudeau Liberals that make dumb moves like this. We need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk about the PM's reaction to the by-elections. We'll talk about Winnipeg and Elmwood Transcona, blue-orange switchers, and what the next few months look like in Canadian politics. More in moments.
Hi, and welcome to IKEA. How can I help?
Oh, my schedule is crazy. I just want some me time.
Maybe it's time to embrace the joy of staying in. With comfortable beds, pillow and decor, mood lighting, and so much more, you can turn your bedroom into the place to be.
Oh, sounds like a dream.
We've got you. Visit us in-store or at ikea-usa.com/sleep to create your dream bedroom today.
BTW FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustable implant, 68 milligrams radio pain. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Before buck naked underwear, going out naked was a negative. Grocery shopping in the nude? A big no-no. Sunday service in the buff? A disservice. And naked in the garage? Just odd. Turn naked into a net positive with buck naked underwear and feel like wearing nothing at all, anywhere. Get buck naked at your Duluth trading store.
What do you think went wrong?
Oh, I think there's all sorts of reflections to take on that, but the big thing is to make sure that Canadians understand that the choice they get to make in the next election about the kind of country we are really matters, and that's the work we're going to continue to do.
That was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacting on the day after the by-elections. And Stuart, I don't know what your reaction was when you first heard that, but I thought, oh, good. Justin Trudeau's reaction to losing in 2 by-elections is that he needs to speak longer and louder at Canadians about why he's so great.
I will admit that I'm a National Post editor, so my first reaction to that clip was, this is going to be great when we put this in a headline. But when you take it on face value, I do think that I used to wonder if maybe there was a certain amount of delusion earlier in the year. So you got the feeling that the Liberals just didn't understand what was going on. They didn't quite take it seriously. And they always had this idea that, at some point, Canadians will understand that Pierre Poilievre is scary, like we think, and then all of a sudden we'll be winning again. That's starting to dissipate, actually. You go to their caucus meetings, and it's not that vibe as much anymore. It's more of a kind of stunned silence. Like they just don't know what to do. They wish they could do something, and they kind of know things are going wrong, and they kind of know the message isn't resonating, but they just don't know what to do. They don't feel like they can get Trudeau to step aside. They don't feel like they have someone to replace him if that does happen. And I think what you hear from Trudeau is that he's still in the first phase. He's in I just need to be better at this, and all of a sudden the polls will change.
It's funny that you describe that as one day soon they'll realize how bad the Conservatives are. After the 2005-2006 election, when Stephen Harper got in, the arrogance coming out of the Liberal caucus after being defeated was unreal. I think it took them maybe until Harper won a majority and Ignatieff took the Liberals down to 3rd place, but definitely the first minority and at least part of Dion's. You would talk to Liberals and they would just say, oh, don't worry, soon we'll be back in power. Do you remember that attitude coming from Liberals back then, Tasha?
Yeah, I do. I think that arrogance is exactly, like I said, why they're in the situation they're in, because this almost is a disbelief that why wouldn't you want us to be running your country? We know best. And it affects them less, I think, when the opposition isn't appealing to common people versus elites like the Conservatives are. The Conservatives have decided to create this dynamic. They've gone full populist, and it's all about the common people versus those elite, ivory tower, Laurentian elitists. That's what the Liberals are. And Trudeau is very emblematic of that because he grew up the son of a prime minister at 24 Sussex Drive. So, he had an elite life. There's no question. He's not the common people. So that juxtaposition makes it even worse because now they can just keep playing it. And he falls into that trap all the time. He doesn't think it's a thing. I think he really does think he knows better. He really does think, people, fans of big government, socialists, they think we know better. If only people listen to the experts and the elites. And, you should listen to experts, but they're not better human beings than the rest of us. And it's that attitude of just nice little people will pat you on the head. You should just listen to me more. No, the people are telling him loud and clear. We know what the issue is. It's you. Me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Like he should take a cue from Taylor Swift and just walk away. But he's not because his frame doesn't allow that. And that's their problem.
It's kind of the reverse of what part of the problem was with the Conservatives in 2019 and 2021. They acted like everyone hated Justin Trudeau as much as they did. And the public wasn't there. And now I don't think the Conservatives are running a campaign that is focused on everyone's got to hate Justin Trudeau like we do. They're running a campaign that says, hey, there's problems out there. We hear you. Here's our solution. I know the Liberals want to say, they're offering nothing, but to me, it's a campaign of times are tough. Here's what we'll do for you. Stuart?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think the thing that Poilievre did do was he took a couple of issues that were really on people's minds and he got there early. And the housing one, I think, is a great example of how badly the Liberals had to play catch up on that because, I think this is, as you guys said, it's a Liberal problem. You could call it arrogance, but there's also the complacency of being in government where you really are just trying to get to the end of the day. Like there's fires everywhere. You're trying to put them all out. The kind of big thinking that you can do in opposition is just almost impossible. And I think every government in the history of the Westminster system has had this problem where they try to create these different ways of getting big ideas into the government, a stale government. And that's really tough. So Poilievre came with this fresh energy and a new kind of idea of what Canadians cared about and how to solve it. And I think that's what's propelled him. But the Liberals are still stuck looking at the guy that they see across the House of Commons that they really hate because Poilievre he's a really good troll in the House of Commons and he has been since he was about 25 years old. So there is this like partisan alternate reality where they're in there getting mad about comments during QP or like documents that were tabled, things that Canadians will never hear about. And it's as you go year by year in government, it gets harder and harder to break out of that alternate reality. And it's partly what the Liberals are in right now.
What's the saying? Every day in government, you put another pebble in your backpack and it gets heavier every day. After 9 years, that's a pretty heavy backpack. So there was a bit of kerfuffle in the House over the Conservatives giving nicknames to people. Carbon tax Carney, or after the news out of the Logic about Brookfield Asset Management trying to set up a massive pension fund with $10 billion from taxpayers. I think you could call him cash in Carney as well as carbon tax Carney. But so they used that. The Conservatives also referred to Chrystia Freeland as the phantom finance minister. And Liberals got their noses out of joint. Karina Gold was standing up and, clutching her pearls and saying, I can't believe they're talking like this. She called Poilievre a fraudster. Chrystia Freeland referred to Conservatives as small and weak, and and that was this week, not just a few weeks ago. So I mean, they're using these terms. It really does seem to be a "how dare you call me names, you bastard."
Well, I think it's more their names aren't as good. They're not as creative. The Conservatives come up with these creative, smarmy things, and the Liberals, they use words like, oh, they're mean and this and that, but they don't go full bore and, create little acronyms for people or specific tags. And so they come from, I will say this, I do find some of the conservative stuff incredibly hokey. I find it, a lot of it very obnoxious. I find it, it's for fundraising. It's like, it's all these sorts of stuff, but it's a style that they use. And And it works for them, and it works in other places like the United States too. It does work. It's a way of doing politics and a way of speaking. And the Liberals don't like it. They don't like it because they don't do it. They can be just as obnoxious in their own way, but they don't do that. They don't say it. They think that is sinking to a different level. And I do think that some of the stuff we see on social media and some of the stuff from the Conservatives it can be very vicious from their proxies, extremely vicious. And that does take the level of political discourse down to a place that is not healthy. But the Liberals, the reason that they're doing that is because the Liberals have made things kind of toxic, have wrecked the housing market, have let too many people into the country who now can't find a place to live. Like their policy decisions on which they pride themselves have created the mess we're in. So it gives an opening to a Conservatives to make up all this funny stuff and go, see, like with Carney and Freeland. I mean, if you make Freeland suddenly second banana to Carney, what do you expect? Like, sure, she's the where is she? Phantom finance minister. It's kind of funny, right? What do you know? So they shoot themselves in the foot again, and the Conservatives they go there.
In terms of policy, the Liberals have been trying to say, we've got good news. Inflation's down to 2%. We've got good news. The OECD has a new report that says how great our economy is, or we're the best at this in the G7. And I keep listening to this, and I've talked to Liberals about it as well, who are frustrated, who say the party at the top is tone deaf. Sure, you can say that inflation's down to 2% now, but groceries are 25% more than they were 2.5 years ago. You can say the economy's doing great, but unemployment just went up to 6.6%. I can't afford a home anymore. They seem to be, you mentioned experts earlier, Tasha, but they seem to be pointing to reports. And I think, well, that's great, but I can't eat an OECD report. Nobody can eat an OECD report. You can. Taste very good. Yeah, maybe you can, print it off, water it down. It would be horrible. But, people worried about the day-to-day parts of their lives aren't wondering, look, my life sucks right now. The economy isn't as good as it was. Everything's more expensive. But what does the OECD think of Canada? Stuart, are they just not connected anymore? I mean, it can happen to any government. You lose connections with people. Have they lost the connection with the average Canadian?
Yeah, this is kind of, you can understand how this happened with this Liberal government, because when they first came to power, it was, they were on the cover of Vogue and all those magazines, and they were swanning around, Justin Trudeau was swanning around the world, getting big receptions everywhere. And that was actually working in their favor with Canadians. Canadians were saying, this is actually kind of cool. People seem to like this guy.
Remember, you could buy a cardboard cutout of Trudeau on Amazon.
yeah, it was real. And you mentioned the Conservatives had trouble with this early on, that they hated Trudeau more than Canadians did, and that takes a while for Canadians to get where Conservatives are, but they're pretty much there now. And the problem for this government is that they lived in a different world. The things that used to work for them, I think, are uniquely bad to be deploying in this moment, where people are just tired, they're fed up. It's post-pandemic, interest rates are high, everything's expensive, and they just don't want to see this kind of stuff because it seems unserious. And I think they are kind of in a rut that, unfair to them because it did work so well before, but you kind of have to develop a new strategy.
Let me ask you about their housing policy. Stuart, you mentioned earlier, housing's one that Pierre Poilievre jumped on right away. And he's been pushing this idea. We'll sell off 15% of government buildings. I think it's 6,000 government buildings. And trust me, there are plenty of surplus buildings, so that could easily happen. And he wants it transformed into housing. You either knock the place down and build housing, or you retrofit it and put in housing. He's also said he'll sell off a lot of federal land. The Liberals have campaigned on this before. It was in their platform in 2015, 2019, 2021. Now they're mocking it. And Justin Trudeau, in response, this should not be a partisan issue. We should all be trying to make housing more affordable for people to buy. But he is trying to make it partisan. And he came out and he kind of stole Poilievre's idea and says, yes, we'll use federal land for housing, but we won't sell the land like those awful Conservatives. We'll lease it to you. And when I saw that, I thought, man, he really wants everyone to believe that the Liberal policy is you'll own nothing and be happy. You're feeding into this. You're just going to be a tenant of the government for your whole life. I don't think that's the Canadian dream. So is that an effective political messaging, Tasha?
No, I share that. I think it's also, he wants to be your landlord. Oh, great. I think both their policies are ridiculous. I'll be honest. I think that you can't retrofit every single building. It's nice to say, let's retrofit the CBC. Have you been to the CBC? Well, you have, in downtown Toronto. You know how much it would cost to retrofit that into housing? It would cost probably more than knocking it down and building on land that is extremely expensive. I think that the whole idea, what are you going to put people out in Tunney's pasture outside of Ottawa and build, on the farmlands there, like that they have, the experimental farms and whatever, buildings that aren't used? I think it's silly. I really think it's silly. I think that
Canada Land Company exists and they do this already. They're redeveloping CFB
it's not
Rockcliffe.
The solution, though. It's not to say that that's the solution is not. What's the solution is reducing demand and incentivizing supply. The private people who are going to build it. I mean, Poilievre's is marginally more realistic in that it's selling, but there has to be a market for that. And until interest rates are lower, there ain't a market. Because developers are abandoning projects as they are. They can't, people are walking away from condos. They can't sell them in Toronto. Prices are dropped. That's the biggest market right there next to Vancouver. And people aren't building. Developers are pausing things because they can't afford the cost. As interest rates come down, the market will come back. And if you reduce demand by curbing immigration, quite frankly, that's the piece that the Liberals really mucked up. They let too many people in post-COVID to make up for the fact that during COVID, we had very few people coming in. But they did it in such a way, assuming that the economy would ramp up and there'd be, jobs for there aren't. So, I think the housing is going to take a while to fix. It's not going to be overnight for anybody. And everyone's promising a quick fix. And it's not going to happen.
Stuart, my ears perked up when I first heard Poilievre say he'll cap immigration and tie it to housing. And I thought, well, one, finally somebody's saying something that makes sense. But two, I think that'll be politically popular. You can go to areas of Mississauga and Brampton where everybody is an immigrant and you raise this issue and they'll say, yeah, there's too many people coming in. This is a universal view now because we've all seen what's happened to the housing supply, the healthcare crisis, jobs. Stats Canada has been screaming at the government for 13, 14 months that you're bringing in people faster than we can create jobs. So when I heard Poilievre say, we'll cap immigration, we'll come up with a formula, tie it to housing, I thought that should work both for votes and in dealing with the supply issue.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this. One is that I think probably given the state of affairs, it was necessary and we just had to get there. And if you look at the polling numbers on how people feel about immigration, it's getting bad. People are not happy about the immigration system right now. The government has realized this. And if you have gotten Liberals to realize that they have to tamp down immigration, that means things have gotten really bad. And I was thinking the other day that this might actually be the lasting legacy of this government. When we look back on that decade, we had a pretty good Canada-wide consensus on immigration. It went through the Chrétien years to the Martin years to the Harper years, where population growth was about the same every year. The number got a little higher, but not by much. And never did immigration become an issue in a political campaign. And I think that Pierre Poilievre will be responsible about it. I think that's why he's tying it to housing and healthcare and all these things. But we all know, we've all seen the politics in Europe. This can go to an irresponsible and a dark place if it gets mishandled. And I know if you talk to Justin Trudeau in 2015, the idea that that would become his legacy, I think, would be almost unbelievable to him. But this is the kind of thing we were talking about, governmental complacency, where things are just ticking along. You're making kind of glib decisions without really looking too far ahead. And if the immigration debate goes sideways, it's because of that. They just turned on the taps too much.
All right, we haven't really talked about the Elmwood-Transcona by-election. We have to, so that executive producer Kevin Libin doesn't get mad at all of us. Well, specifically at me. But let's talk about it in this context. We have this riding that has now been won 11 out of the last 12 times by the NDP. The only time it didn't go NDP, I believe, was 2011 to 2015. The Conservatives held it. They came close to taking it. Carl Boulanger former advisor to Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair, and I know you know Carl well, Tasha. He said straight up, Jagmeet Singh ripped up the agreement because they were hearing at the doors in Winnipeg how angry people were. They had to get out of the deal before the by-election to save the furniture. And it was still 48% NDP, 44% Conservative. I think we're going to see more blue-orange switcher ridings across the country in the next election. And while it seems like a bit of bravado for Jagmeet Singh to say, the next election's between me and Pierre Poilievre, in some areas it will be. And for areas where they have a Liberal MP and they're looking for an alternative, that'll be the battle. So what are your thoughts on one, the by-election, and two, a battle between Singh and Poilievre?
So this is the thing. If you look at the numbers, the NDP vote held, they dropped 1.6% from their last percentage. They did not lose their vote. The Liberals dropped.
The Liberals collapsed.
The Liberals collapsed. Yes, the Liberals collapsed by 10%. The People's Party had almost 6% of the last election. They collapsed by 5%. You add that up, and that's what the Conservatives got. They got 15% more than they did the last time. And those votes were not NDP votes. I agree with you. They were appealing to the NDP, but I think the NDP vote held for particular factors there too, which including Wab Kinew, who's a very popular NDP premier in Manitoba. So that's not going to replicate itself elsewhere. I do agree with you, however, that the NDP and the Conservatives are going after the same voter because the NDP's abandoned that voter. They're both going after the union blue-collar voter. The NDP has veered off into the progressive fantasy world on so many issues and far to the left and not the priorities that those voters have. A lot of very woke issues, also on the Israel-Palestine or Israel-Hamas conflict. So you have situations where the NDP is talking about stuff. The average working person is like, that's not my problem. Why are you talking? Those are the votes Poilievre can get. That is where I think he can make gains. But I don't think this riding actually ended up being that.
As someone that grew up in a home with an NDP sign on the front lawn and a dad who was in a private sector blue-collar trade union, I can tell you there's a lot of those guys available. And that is the battle because the NDP has abandoned the union hall for the faculty club. And I think that's an issue. So, Stuart, as you look to what Doug Ford did in Ontario, winning in places like Hamilton, Windsor, Timmins, Pierre Poilievre's trying to run the same playbook in this election, whether it's in Ontario or in British Columbia, to try and peel away some of those votes.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And the little bit of reporting I've done on this, I'm pretty confident that this is a real thing to Pierre Poilievre. Like, this isn't something they're dabbling in and they're going to do a Labor Day speech and that's about it. They are very committed to this and they're going to take some hard votes in the House of Commons to do this. And, you know, there is a faction of free market conservatives who, if you say we're going to ban replacement workers at federally regulated workplaces, they're going to say, why are we doing this? We're a conservative party. We're supposed to be the party of the market. And I know that will exist. But as Doug Ford has shown, the sort of ideological, philosophical free market conservative, they exist in the newspaper columns, but they aren't a huge faction of voters out there. And I think that Poilievre has realized this. We did a story last week about Poilievre's. He actually wrote us a comment personally saying, here's how I evolved my opinion from a sort of libertarian free market guy to someone who now believes that, you know, unions are great. It's interesting. They sent that story around to all of their people and said, this is what we believe now. Get used to it. So I think there's something there. I think Poilievre is going to hold that line. He may get some grumbling on the right, but I think, as you can see, it's not going to matter too much to him.
Well, it worked previously for Boris Johnson before he imploded for other reasons. I'm sure you both watched parts of the Republican National Convention in the States. They had the head of the Teamsters Union speak. This is a movement in conservatism throughout the Western, at least English-speaking world, isn't it, Tasha?
Well, sure, because union jobs have disappeared. And the left behind class, as people are calling, you know, there's left behinds and the laptop class. And the laptop class, especially during the pandemic, had it easy. You know, we're part of that. We work from home, right? You can work from home. You don't lose your job. You were relatively safe. It's the people who are on the lines, manufacturing, people who were working in construction, working in difficult environments where they actually had to be around people. They suffered because either they couldn't work, they weren't allowed, or they could get COVID if they were there. So those folks had a much different experience for that span of time. The convoy was the symbol of that. Not every union person was a convoy activist, but the convoy was kind of this litmus thing of, you know what, the working people, this government doesn't listen to working people. That was the messaging. Poilievre seized on it. He won on that issue. He won the leadership with those folks, with the support of people across the country who sympathized. And he's taken that and he will run on that, because that is right now, there's this populist anger around the world of people who were hard done by globalization, hard done by the pandemic, who say, those elites in government don't listen to me. And so he's going to be like, I'm fighting for the people who don't. Trump says the same thing. I'm fighting people who don't get listened to. And I'm not saying Poilievre is like Trump. They're very different politicians. But like you said, Johnson, you see it in Europe as well with other governments. They're speaking for that person. And those people want champions, and he is their champion right now.
Well, we'll end on this, and I'll ask you, Stuart. I would also argue that the NDP doesn't speak to those blue-collar trades workers, because they are the party of no. And we see this in Ontario. Doug Ford says, okay, we'll build more housing. That's going to employ these people. No. We'll build a new highway. No. Anything that these guys rely on for their jobs, the NDP and to a degree liberals, who identify as progressives rather than as liberals now, they say no. And conservatives, at the provincial or federal level are saying, yeah, we got to build. And if you build, these guys are employed. So it's in their best interest, isn't it?
What they need is an old socialist running that party. And I don't know if they exist anymore. But you can see, I will tell you, at least somebody in that party is aware that this is going on, because they've started to edge away from the carbon tax. And, Bernie Sanders, someone like that, would have said, we can't put the burden of fixing climate change on workers. That's just not what we do. But the sort of urban progressive that is dominant in the NDP right now says, this is what we have to do. We all have to sacrifice for climate change. It's a different mentality. And you saw that debate playing out when the NDP did that. There are two factions in that party. And, I think we know which one is probably going to win. I think the urban progressives are pretty dominant right now. And Poilievre has done a pretty good job of siphoning the working class away. But I still think it is there for the NDP. I think if they can change things before the next election, they could make it a real fight.
I'm not sure they will.
That's the next episode.
Stuart Thompson, Ottawa bureau chief for the National Post, Tasha Carradine, columnist. And of course, they both together produce Political Hack, the newsletter. Make sure you sign up for that. Thank you both for joining me today to talk about all of this.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name is Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Remember to hit subscribe. Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get it. Make sure you hit subscribe. Help us out by leaving us a comment or a review, and tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.